Okay, hi again, everybody. So I'm just going to continue because I think some of this stuff is important and interesting. And hopefully, I'm not boring. I'm not so boring that, you don't feel like watching it, but you don't really have to watch these if you don't want to. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about power because it's something that is a really important aspect of all this when you're talking about when you're talking about any oppressed kind of population. But um, in anthropology deals a lot with the question of power. Feminism in academia deals a lot with power. So here's an example of an entire book and a whole journal dedicated to gender and power dynamics. So I want to talk a little bit about that and what feminism has to say about that. There is sort of this concept that there are gatekeepers, right, who kind of I guess to just use this cartoon as the example, he's kind of like the gatekeeper as to whatever kind of he's in a position of power to decide who gets to access resources, basically. And I think it's an interesting cartoon. You might have seen it before, but the point it's trying to make is, I mean, he's talking about being fair, but what he's actually talking about equality here, and I think fairness is something different. Fairness or equity is not necessarily treating everyone exactly the same, right? So, um, and you can talk about this kind of phenomenon in any kind of, like, so for example, if you're a Marxist, or you like the ideas of the Communist Manifesto or something like that, you might be you might take the angle that that society, the way it should approach society is to be fair, not necessarily to treat everyone exactly the same, but to have some fairness in society. And so that's what this cartoon is driving at. But the gist of it is not everyone is in the same situation, and so to treat everyone equally doesn't necessarily mean that the system is fair, or that there's fair access to resources, or whatever the result of this test is supposed to be. So just those kind of concepts, keep those in mind: equity versus fairness. Equity versus equality. And here's kind of another example. It's sort of another famous example with the guys in the boxes. I kind of like the capitalism one. I think it's funny. But you can see, so with equality, all three of the guys have, the same thing. They're all given one box. And then equity, fairness, is the distribution of the boxes so that they end up being, more or less equal. They can all see over the fence. And if you, I think on Netflix, I think this documentary Misrepresentation is on Netflix. If you're interested in watching it, it's interesting. It's about representation of women in media. So it's a lot of media studies and media literacy stuff in there. But I liked this quote from the high school student about how empowered women in general threaten men because they feel that an empowered woman is just putting down a man as opposed to sort of trying to raise herself. All right. So another thing that comes up often in feminism is this idea of patriarchy. So just like real quick basic definition of patriarchy is who is in charge. I've tried to find more recent data on uh, media companies, these media industries, and clout positions are like executives, like the most powerful positions in a media company. I have not been able to find more recent data on that. I'll try Googling again. But you have that, at least as an example, from 2003. So, who's in charge of making laws? Who's in charge of the government? Who's in charge of the economy? Who's in charge of the media? Um, a patriarchal, a patriarchy is partly in reference to the origins of the system itself. So look at the origins of, the United States, for example, and also who who is in charge of the vast majority of those things: the government, politics, the economy, media. Um, and just from, the Congress, let me see, you have the um, 115th Congress, so this will be like 2016, I think, 2016, 2017. This breakdown of Congress, you can see the, I'm going to use my cursor here. You can see the gender. Look how incredibly white. This is just the House of Representatives, by the way. Um, Very white, and very straight, question mark. Uh, just very few who openly identify, but I mean, I think all of these things are really important to look at, and here you can see women, and they went up like a little bit. Looks like for women anyway, 92 in the 115th, and now the current House is 106, so it's gone up. This last 2018 election was pretty big in terms of diversity. Like, despite the massive gains made in 2018, like, oh, I mean, okay, so in my perspective, they're gains. It still looks really remarkably similar to to the last house. So that's kind of pretty slow movement in a lot of ways. So other kinds of power, there's normalizing power. We didn't talk about normalizing power in our class. I could send a video on that if you want. It's just sort of like what's taken for granted of what your role of fill in the blank should be. So if you're a boss, you kind of act a certain way like a boss just because you know what a boss is supposed to act like. And society will kind of, steer you in that in a particular direction, and sometimes even, you will be marginalized or punished in some way if you don't fit the norm, depending on, what it is. If you're kind of effeminate boy, for example, you could get made fun of or beat up or whatever. That kind of like disciplining, I would call it. So these are just Google image searches for masculine and feminine, just to like look how clearly they're defined here. Um, so just like another aspect of power in terms of gender. I noticed after a while, I thought it was interesting how with the women, a lot of them are touching their face or have their hands near their face, and I wonder, is that a coincidence, or does that mean something? Is it significant in some way? Yeah, I don't know. Cultural power. You can pause this and look at this. I think it's interesting. Sort of cultural power. This letter from NASA to this woman that was interested in being an astronaut. It was not illegal for a woman to be an astronaut, I'm sure, but institutions say this is how things are going to be for us, and that can be very powerful. Just a little bit more of that here. You can see the difference between these two magazines, Girl's Life and Boy's Life, and how early, this young girl, she looks like she might be 14 or something, and it's already sexualizing her a bit. The first kiss, and, wake up pretty, and all these things about how she looks. And the boy's life is all about, what do you want to do when you grow up and everything.